Hello everyone, my name is Meichen Wu, and my research topic is can we avoid more Jewel Beetles invading Canada, understanding a potential invasive species Agrilus dureli. So, sorry, it doesn't work. It's freezing.
It's freezing. Okay.
Okay. Here we go. So based on the question, I think everybody may want to know what is Agrilus dureli. Actually, it is a new native wood-boring beetles in Beijing, China. This beetles was first described in 2011, and we can see the map. This is the China in the world, and this is the Beijing in the China in the red frame. And after 5 years, a CFIA project field work described an infected breeding dureli within Willows in Go. The dark red area in Go district in Beijing, we can see this red point. It is the original breakout location found by CFIA. And there is the serious crown deadback on Willows. Agrilus species have similar life cycle with EAB. We can see this is the picture showing the whole flow, how they grew up. And female adults lay between 40 to 70 eggs on the bark. After hatching, the larvae begin feeding under the bark because the tissue layer with the spreads nutrients throughout the tree. And when the larva grew up to an adult, it shoots a D-shaped exit hole in the bark, and then adults seek out right here. This is the D-shaped exit hole, and the adults seek out new trees, and the process begins again. EAB and dureli, both the jewel beetles from the same genus Agrilus, and their life behavior are similar, but the appearance of dureli is unroamed green, and with 4 white dots on the wings and 2 red strips on the side of the body. They both are native to East Asia. Dureli, but the only difference is dureli affect willow trees, but the EAB affect ash trees. We know EAB already added to the blacklist in CFIA since 2002. EAB started to transmitted to 2 provinces in Canada. We can see the infectation range on this map. EAB already infectation these 2 provinces. Also, there have a small infectation range in other provinces. But for EAB, we don't know anything about this. Is this new beetles gonna attack Canada's willow trees? We still need to think about this. So why we need to understand dureli? The reason is there were several devastating impacts for the environment caused by several invasive insects in Canada, like mountain pie beetles in BC and EAB in Ontario. So Canada governments want to avoid more invasive beetles invading Canada. The second reason is this insect could become invasive beetles is uncertain because this new beetle without any research described them before. Based on the collected data and results, CFIA can decide Agrilus dureli add into the blacklist or not. This summer, I worked for CFIA to collect data, and there are 4 objectives in my study. The first one is serving for dureli in Beijing. The second is describing infected trees and the biology of dureli. The third one is assessing the impact of beetles on infected stands. The last one is providing recommendations for CFIA and Beijing forest management. Now let's move to describing and assessing the impact in Beijing. For study sites, During the summer, I drove all around of the Beijing area. Beijing is divided into 16 districts. Only one district of Montago found a dureli during the summer. The red area in map is infected district in Beijing. And zoom in the map, the red point is only infected location I know before I start my surveying. I numbered this place, set 0. After 2 months searching, here is the total 18 study sites I found. The 3 different color means the different infected rate. Yellow means the light infected rate, orange means medium, and the red means high. And we can see actually the infected rate on both sides of set 0 showing a gradient decline over distance. So I think Agrilus dureli spread from set 0. Now let's work into a study site. For example, this is set 2. It is the abandoned tourism place before, and it's near to river around 100 meters. The first step we need to do is determine the site type. This is site 2. We can mark it as street tree. The next is recording the site information. I asked the local people. They told me actually the site 2, all the trees are man-made trees. And the next, I need to check is there any flooding or not. Actually, there's no. The next, I need to check is there any soil compaction on the site. For the site 2, there's no soil compaction. And then after recording information, I have to count how many uninfected trees in the site. Back to the site, we can see there's 2 yellow dots. Actually, it's the uninfected trees. So we need to count it 2. And the next, I count how many infected trees. So we can see this picture. There's all the red dots, it means the infected trees. So I mark it 13. And next, I need to examine infected trees. The last step is randomly measure 20 trees, height and DBH, including infected and uninfected trees. So So after measuring, I totally got 68 infected willows and 118 uninfected willows in all the sites. From the left hand, we can see tree height of the infected trees is lower than uninfected trees, and another graph showing like DBH of the infected trees thinner than uninfected trees. Therefore, my result shows like short and thin trees are easily affected by dureli. Now let's focus on the infected willows, height and infected rate in different forest type. After researching study sites categorized by street tree, residential, windrow, park, and riparian forest. The blue histogram is the tree height in these tree types, and the red line means infected rate in the study site. We can see the height of the street tree is the lowest, but there's the infected rate is the highest, and the increasing tree height treats the decreasing infected rate. This result confirmed that dureli beetles like infected short tree more. Okay, after surviving within site, let's work close on describing factors to infected trees. First of all, we can identify tree species. During the research, actually only 2 host willow species was found, 61 Salix mastodana and 7 Salix babylonica. Both willow species are native to China. After identify, I need to do canopy declining rating. There's the climbing rating system. There are total 5 different grades. And then I have to check is there any apochromic shoes on the infected trees. Here is the example. We can see the apochromic shoes on the red frame. And the next, I need to check is there any woodpeckers feeding on the bark or not. This is the example. And the next, I have to see is there any exposed galleries on the tree. I need to record height and the direction. After the assessment, I need to measure tree height and DBH of tree. The last part, I need to measure the height and width of exit holes. This is the example. This is the exit hole, width and height. This is the beetles want to carry out. And next, I have to cut windows on the bark. This is me doing the work. Actually, we can see obviously this side is suffering the flooding. And for cutting the bark, there's the standard size is 20 times 20 centimeters. When the gallery is exposed, we need to categorize these 5 different gallery density. And this is the figure shows the number of willows damaged by dureli in the gallery density category. Category 3, we can see here, is the highest at 21 willows, followed by category 4, 16 willows. Because there are 3 trees were parented trees, so in the case I can now able to cut it. So the damage category is unknown. For the result, although the adult feeding of the gallery species usually does not cause any significant damage to the trees, but there are enough larva galleries, nutrients flow within the tree will be distracted, and the tree may die after a few years. So based on the gallery density, we can know the time of the infectation on the tree, like how many years the tree infected. During the research, total 16 infected willows found adults, and their tree's average gallery density is around 3. It indicated that adults want to continue to infect on trees that have been infected for 3 years. Therefore, we can see dureli reproduce on a host tree repeatedly. Another finding is exposed galleries was found most often on the south side of the tree. Medium trunk is actually the height that I can easily approach and to compare with other heights. So in the means, medium trunk data is more accurate. Study mentions that adults, females prefer the sunny side of the tree to do over position, but the warmer temperature of this direction and benefit larval survival. My data indicated that dureli has the same characteristics as other Agrilus species. The final step is collect dureli adults and larvae. The majority of adults was collected alive on the bark, and a few of them I collect under the bark. And this is the larva I found this is the subwood and the inner bark. Here is, let's talk about biology of Agrilus dureli. The average length of dureli is 12.65 millimeters in total 62 specimens. Right-hand picture, it is the head part of larva. I measured the mouth part, is right here, to use for distinguish between Larvae Instars of Agrilus species. And here's the number of larvae in the standard width of epistomes, showing in 4 different instars. We can see there are 4 clear instars, most of specimens in fourth instars, but only 1 specimen in the second instar. But actually, with the standard width of epistome based on EAB, we can see clear 4 stages in this graph. So the life history of dureli is similar with EAB. Now let's discussion. Based on the finding, EAB, my data shows that biology of dureli is similar with Agrilus species, and they prefer south sunny side and they reproduce on a host tree repeatedly. Literature mentions that larger host size may provide more resources for larvae. Host tree with a large TPH may confer more protection and increase larva survival. However, the difference is my data shows like dureli prefer infect on short and thin trees. Let's discussion for Beijing. Dureli was first described in 2011. These beetles exist and breed in Beijing at least 8 years. Willow is everywhere in Beijing, actually. But these beetles did not cause massive damage to Beijing's willows. Why it didn't spread large range? I conclude 3 reasons. The first one is natural enemies of Agrilus dureli can slow down the infection rate. We can see natural enemies include parasites, wasp, and woodpecker. This is the wasp I took the picture in the uninfected willow. And the second reason is forest management in Beijing actually is different. We can see after observation and inquiries in Beijing, the willow trees in urban area was usually numbered. They put the label actually in the every willow tree in the park, and the management people will regularly inject chemicals into willow trees to provide beetle infestation. So I think it's difficult for Agrilus to break through the long-term management willows. The last reason is because the willow has the very low commercial value, the government does not allow falling of timber, and people barely to cut infected wooden branches and with Agrilus and move around. And now let's discuss for Canada. I mentioned the host willow species found is Salix mastodona and Salix babylonica. In Canada, we only can see the Salix mastodona introduced to Ontario, but for the babylonica already extirpated. So right now we only can see one could be infected trees in Ontario. But in Canada, we have total 54 native willow species cover whole the country. Also, if these species have strong viability in new environment, it is really hard to say Agrilus won't infect the native willow species. So we need to care about that. To me, I think Agrilus dureli is a potential invasive beetles, and this species should not come to Canada. The last part is recommendations. The extent of damage of Agrilus dureli to trees and the category of trees being infected provides background for future work and could be used by CFIA to assess the risk of introduction, and need more data on biology under different conditions in the field. Beijing managers who are concerned about the future of willows are notified and encourage them to pay attention to the infestation of Agrilus. And the last one is reduce long-distance dispersal events like human transport of infected firewood and nursery stock. So in the end, I want to thank my supervisor, Sandy Smith, getting me to finish this report, this topic, and thanks to my supervisor, Chui, providing this job to me and to training me how to study this field. And thanks, Jay, helped me to deal with the data. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, hold up. I'm going to ask a question of the external examiner who is online here. Troy, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, I can.
Oh, you're nice and loud, so I guess you can go ahead and ask a question if you have one, or wait, I can ask other people if you want to think first.
Sure, yeah, I'll go for it first.
Okay.
Great job there, Meichen.
Oh, thank you.
You mentioned that you only found dureli along the riverside there, and within the actual city part of Beijing, you didn't find dureli, and you gave 3 possible reasons. You mentioned natural enemies, forest management practices in the city of Beijing, and that civilians aren't allowed to cut wood and move it around.
Yes.
Is there a particular environmental factor with regards to your sites? That could be another reason why you found it outside of Beijing and not within the city itself?
Can you see the PowerPoint, this slide?
I don't think he can hear you. Just...
Oh, sorry. So can you see the slide in the PowerPoint? Actually, this is the whole Beijing area, and the dark the black circle means the urban area. And actually, Montagu district is the suburban area. The most forest type is right here, but we can see there's a lot of river right here. And we can see this the zoom-in type. The dark area is the urban in Beijing. And actually, the yellow frame, I don't know is there any dureli or not, because I haven't checked this part yet.
Meichen, is there something that you think is happening to the trees, to the willow trees, that's different than within the city?
Yeah, because I record the floating satellite, and you can see this the yellow frame actually is suffering the floating. And we can see the infectation rate is very high, I think. And also my study showing like woodpecker showing like this set frequently. So I think because the biology environment, dureli like to stay in forest, not into the urban area. That's my answer.
Do you have any other questions, Troy?
No, that's it for now, John. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, you can ask later if you want. Okay.
Hi.
Hello.
So when you are looking at the infested versus the not infested trees,
Yeah.
and you're talking about how the infested trees are, well, you're saying that the beetle prefer to infest trees that are shorter and thinner in DVH.
Yeah,
It's possible that as a result of the infestation, the trees are shorter and thinner rather than them preferring trees that are shorter and thinner.
I think it's only suitable for the suburban area. Because in the city, normally the trees the height is not high because actually Chinese people like to pleasing the tourism's eyes. Normally they cut the crown, so the height in urban area is not the height. The tree height is not high, but. Sorry, I can't find any the short tree in urban area have infected by dureli. Yeah, it's kind of tricky.
I was just curious. In EIB, I was wondering, have people looked to see, I'm sure presumably they have looked to see, what are the relationships among the species that are attacked by EAB in China versus EAB in Canada?
Okay.
And how much of a generalist is EAB compared to this thing? I guess what I'm trying to get at, is there any way, inferring from what we know about other invasive insect biology, what they will attack, what they won't attack, relative to what's in their home range? Can we make any inferences about how likely this thing is to attack other Canadian willows? So, for example, would EAB apparently will attack quite a variety of ash species in Canada.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, does it attack a whole variety of ash species in China? And this thing appears to be relatively specialized. Does that mean it's less likely to attack Canadian willows? Or maybe some of our Canadian willows are taxonomically close to the Chinese ones?
Thanks for the question. It's pretty good. Thank you. Actually, for EAB, I asked the local government people. It's showing this area in the south in Beijing area, and actually, Beijing government is pretty straightforward. They just cut all the infected ash trees and plant a new one. So actually, in Beijing. It's really hard to say, but you mentioned the willow trees and the other species. Actually, during the research, I found suspect infected trees in Beijing. It is the poplars. Actually, the poplars have the similar Agrilus showing on the trunk. but I'm not sure it's affected by Agrilus or other species. But yeah, we still think about this to, do the research in the future. Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. Yeah.
Here we go. What's that? Okay, thanks.
Thank you. As part of the strategy to combat this in China, did the authorities try to deliberately encourage the numbers of woodpeckers in the areas that were infested?
Yeah.
They did?
Sorry, can you...
The question was there an effort to increase the numbers of woodpeckers?
Yeah.
Right. Was there any attempt to manage woodpecker populations?
Oh, okay.
Is this, yeah. Was there an attempt to manage woodpecker populations?
Oh, I haven't researched that yet, but I have the study for this. Woodpeckers show in the site with the floating is. Sorry, what I'm saying. Woodpecker normally show in the forest area. They don't show in urban area. I barely see woodpecker in cities, but for the populations. Beijing forest government, they don't have the clear policy for protect woodpeckers because woodpeckers is not the highest species in Beijing, I think. Yeah.
So I just had a question back to ecology of willows, and that you said that you've seen them more along riparian areas being affected. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you think that has something to do with because willows, they can stand high water table, but if that water table is not at the proper time or for a little bit longer, then that may make them a little bit more susceptible to these insects. And changes in water table, climate, and all of that could most likely could be an impact, because if you've seen them only along riparian areas. The bug.
So your question is...
Do you think that could be like the changes in hydrology and how long the water table sits there that may impact trees and they get more susceptible to the insect?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
So, willows, they thrive in conditions that have high water table and they can be flooded.
Yes.
However, that doesn't mean that they can survive in those conditions all the time. Mm-hmm. So let's say if you have them even for a day or two in spring for too long under the flooded condition, they might get susceptible maybe to some of these insects. Do you think that there is that connection? Or maybe I just read your slide wrongly? Because you said that all of them are along riparian areas.
Yes.
And Salix babylonica and Salix matsudana are very popular urban trees everywhere in China, in Europe, here.
Yeah.
And you didn't see anything in urban areas, right?
Yeah. I think, back to the map, I still think the whole... Actually, the Agrilus dureli, the populations is greater right here. You mentioned that, right? But why is exposed to other places? I think this area have the high richness for beetles, and this is area. Actually, I grew up in Beijing, but I never saw that much insects in this area. So this is I think the temperature and the elevations are around 200 meters, and I think it's pretty good, for the biology, beetles and animals to survive. So that's why I think I can understand. I think is my answer.
Good job, Meichen. Appreciate it, and thank your father for his car, the use of his car. It was fantastic. It made it a lot easier in Beijing than renting one. But more, how do you know that you have dureli? How do you know it's Agrilus dureli? All those beetles you collected.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, just because the Agrilus have the very obvious appearance, because they have 4 white dots on the wings and the 2 white strips on the both of the side of body. And the other Agrilus, actually, I found them, the other species, but they didn't show like this appearance. And I think I barely see other Agrilus species affected on willows. So, yeah, I need to check it out.
Yeah, it's already been sent to Poland for Czech Republic.
Okay, yeah.
So you'll know for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.